My autobiography. What mischief are you brewing in that head of yours now, White Wolf? What is the matter? Tired of all Dandelion's epics that paint you as some celibate saint who walks on water, looking for a bedtime story that is a bit more authentic and more dangerous? You'd better be sure. My story doesn't feature many heroic dragon slayings. It does, however, feature several rather embarrassing moments of being chased by a dragon that set my dress on fire. And listening to my story comes at a very high price. But seeing as you've been so good tonight, I'll make an exception and indulge this little unreasonable request of yours. But let's get one thing straight. If you dare fall asleep halfway through or give me that misguided, pitying look of yours, the one you give to stray kittens, I promise, you'll wake up to find you've been turned into a duck that can only quack. So, my love, where would you like me to begin? With the radiant sorceress of Vengerberg, the name that makes the whole north tremble, or with the hunchbacked little monster from Bedtime, who hardly even deserved a name? I knew you'd pick that one. You and your incurable hero complex, you've always had a fatal attraction to broken, helpless little things, haven't you? All right, for the price of that kiss. But listen, Gerald, this isn't a story for you to pity. That girl, she was no princess waiting for a white knight. She was a stone thrown into the mud. You either let the sludge swallow you, or you sharpen yourself into the deadliest blade. You should be very glad you met the latter. Her story began in Bedtime, a place you'd never want to visit, my love, unless you have a particular fondness for observing different varieties of mud and despair. It had only one smell: wet earth, poverty, and the cheap owl my father could never get enough of. The way he looked at me, you know. It was the way you might look at a three-legged dog, except your eyes would hold that damnable sympathy. His held pure, undiluted disgust. He saw the knot of bone on my back as the sum total of all his life's failures. Isn't it funny how men always love to blame their misfortunes on a woman? And my mother, she was like a beautiful ghost, always floating in the corners of the room. Her weapons weren't fists or curses. Oh no, that would have been too direct. Her weapons were tears and silence, a suffocating silence that could freeze the very air. After my father had spent his rage, she would approach wordlessly and wipe the blood from the corner of my mouth with a damp cloth. Her touch was always so cold, Gerald, colder than the winter rain in Bedtime. She never once said, "Your father is wrong," nor did she ever say, "My poor child." Her sorrow was reserved for herself, as if I were merely a mirror reflecting her own unfortunate life. A reflection she dared not look at directly. Her weakness was a more corrosive poison. It taught me that silent submission is more hateful than open violence, because it rots you from the inside out. So you see, that is why I despise silent pity more than anything. If you ever see me hurt, White Wolf, don't just stand there staring with those sad cat eyes. Either get angry on my behalf or kiss it until it stops hurting. Preferably, you'll do both. And then, just like in all the badly written tales, a fairy godmother made her entrance. Except this one didn't bother with pumpkins and mice. She was far more adept at turning people into obedient puppets. Or worse, to sire de rise. When she walked into our hovel, it was like a queen stepping into a pigsty. The very air grew thin. My father, who usually lorded over us all, suddenly looked like a rooster with its neck caught in a grip, forgetting even how to crow. That was the first time I saw it, Gerald. That true power doesn't need to shout. Its mere presence is enough to bring everything else to its knees. Her gaze passed over me, not with pity or disgust, but with something that chilled me even more potential. She looked at me the way you look at an old sword, rusted, perhaps, but forged from superior steel. You look at me like that sometimes, you know. Especially after we've argued. That is a mixture of, what am I going to do with you? And I really want to tie you up. Honestly, White Wolf, do all you powerful men enjoy assessing things you desire? The whole transaction was absurdly fast. My father barely even haggled. 4 marks, my love. I was worth about as much as a decent pig. He even seemed relieved to finally be rid of the burden that shamed him. You see, I was quite cheap back then, not like now. Keeping me now costs you everything you have, doesn't it? My good mother, she didn't even turn her head. And Tisaya had no time for a sentimental farewell scene. She was like a merchant handling newly acquired goods. She grabbed my wrist, and that grip. I've only ever felt a similar stubbornness from one other person, a certain white-haired witcher who refuses to let go. She said nothing, just glanced at the air before us and then, Gerald, you think tumbling down a cliff is unpleasant? Try having your soul ripped clean from your body, tossed into a boiling cauldron of stars to be stirred, and then violently shoved back into a shell that feels utterly foreign. And so, my grand entrance was to be spectacularly sick. All over Atuza's pristine marble floors, which were polished enough to reflect my own pathetic, ghostly image right back at me. Utterly charming, wasn't I? I am sure I was thinking, well, that is it. This Tisaya woman will surely return me for a refund. Perhaps even get a mark or 2 back. It is a good thing she didn't, though. Otherwise, you wouldn't have met the me who, well, at the very least, doesn't taste of vomit when she kisses you. Don't you give me that look, White Wolf, as if you'd actually travel back in time to sweep that pathetic little monster into your arms. She didn't need it, and I wouldn't allow it. Tisaya gave me no time for self-pity. She didn't even deign to look down at me, just Tesk. With a dismissive flick of her wrist, the evidence of my miserable arrival vanished from the floor, as if my very presence were a stain in need of immediate cleansing. And then I saw them. Oh, Gerald, it was quite a sight. A flock of pristine, chattering swans in immaculate uniforms, their spines as straight as a row of pikes, with the kind of innocent arrogance that comes from a life without hardship. And there I was, a muddy, dishevelled crow, kneeling in the centre of their perfect, sterile world. Their stares! It wasn't pure hatred, that would have been too simple. It was a far more wounding mix of curiosity and disgust. The way one might watch a cockroach crawl across a dining table. They were assessing me, trying to comprehend how such a thing had ended up here. Tell me, my love, if you had been there, would you have given that poor little crow a second glance, or would you have averted those captivating golden eyes of yours, just as elegantly as all the other? Swans answer honestly. Now, it is a very important question. It will determine whether or not you get a reward tonight. You pass for now. But honestly, White Wolf, you should be glad you weren't there. Knowing your incurable habit of picking up strays and trouble, you probably would have tried to take that dirty, ugly little crow home with you. And then, gods know what kind of mess you'd have gotten yourself into. That night, I was truly alone for the first time. In a room with a dozen other girls, I had never felt more isolated. Silence, can be more deafening than any scream. They didn't bully me, they didn't taunt me. They simply ignored me. They built a wall of whispers and knowing glances that completely shut me out. I lay there in that cold, hard bed, listening to them talk about the thrill of their first spells, or complain about a strict instructor topics. So alien to me, they might as well have come from another world. The chaos raging inside me went quiet too, as if it sensed the strength of this cage. And it just sat like a lead weight in my chest, making it hard to breathe. I still have that dream sometimes, of being in that cold bed surrounded by whispers, feeling as small as a speck of dust. It is better now, though. When I wake from it, I just have to open my eyes to see your tolerable, handsome face. It is far more effective than any nightmare-warding charm. So, you are not allowed to wake up before I do understand. It was on that night that I first thought about escape. I looked at my own thin wrists, where the skin was so pale you could see the blue of the veins beneath, like a map leading to silence. I thought perhaps with just one small cut, all the pain, the humiliation, and the loneliness could just drain away like blood, and then it would all be over. It was the first decision I ever made entirely on my own, a decision about the end. Such a simple, such an alluring thought. The bravest and most cowardly plan a desperate, pathetic creature could conceive. Of course I failed. Tisaya was faster than death, her footsteps like hard chips of ice. She didn't comfort me, didn't embrace me. She just stood there, looking down at me, her eyes filled with pure rage and disappointment. "Sorceresses never show weakness," she said. "If you want to die, throw yourself from the tower. Don't waste my time with this furtive nonsense. You see, White Wolf, my rebirth began with a failed death. It is a good thing she stopped me, otherwise who would be here to warm this cold bed of yours, and who would be here to cause you endless trouble just like this?" After that night, everything changed. Tisaya didn't become kinder, quite the opposite. She became harder. It was as if she took my foolish attempt as a personal insult to her investment. She began to train me with a near-brutal efficiency, as if to beat the very concept of weakness out of my bones. Her lesson was simple yet profound. In this world, pretty girls with a little talent end up as pawns, used and discarded. Only the truly powerful women, the ones who are feared, get to write the rules. Pain, fear, loneliness. She said, "These are not emotions to be coddled. They are fuel, the most raw and potent fuel for chaos." So I began to burn. I took the disgust from my father, the pity from my mother, the scorn from the other girls, all of it, and I threw it all like kindling into the fire inside me. I stopped crying in the dark. While they were sleeping and whining about the next day's lessons, I was sneaking into the library, devouring ancient scrolls on transformation, on glamours, on control. I told myself that if the world insisted on seeing a monster, then I would become the most powerful, most dazzling monster they had ever laid eyes on, one they could never look away from. It is a mad thought, isn't it? But then, I suppose you'd understand. They call you a monster too, don't they? Perhaps that is why. We always find our way back to each other. Their stairs. And then came the ascension. Except at Aretusa, there are no flowers or applause. There is only magic, blood, and excruciating pain. Tisaya led me to a cold room, windowless, containing only a massive mirror, magically polished to a flawless sheen. "Power," she said, "requires a worthy vessel. Beauty," she said, "is a weapon deadlier and more deceptive than any blade." And then she began to sculpt me. "Geralt, you've taken countless wounds in your life. You know the feeling of broken bones and torn flesh. But can you imagine it? Feeling every bone in your body being crushed and remolded by an unseen force. Feeling your own skin being peeled away like an ill-fitting parchment, only to be replaced. It wasn't healing. It was a brutal, destructive rebirth. I kept my eyes open the entire time. I stared into that mirror at the monster who was falling apart, watching as her twisted spine was brutally straightened, as her features were reshaped into what they are now. When it was over, I looked at the strange, perfect woman in the mirror and shed. My first tear since Bedtime. It wasn't for joy, nor for sorrow. It was because I knew that the little hunchbacked girl, the unwanted monster, had truly and utterly died that day. So, this face you now touch, these lips you kiss, they came at a very high price. White Wolf. You'd better treasure them and stop making me angry, do you understand? The first thing I did when I walked out of that room wasn't to admire the perfect reflection in the mirrors. Nor was it to feel the stares of the girls who had once scorned me, stares that were now a mixture of envy and fear. The first thing I did was walk to the window of the highest tower in Aretusa and look down at the raging sea below. Tisaya had told me to jump if I wanted to die. And as I looked into that abyss for the first time, I felt not fear, but power. I survived. I told myself, I survived my father. I survived my father. I survived the mud of Bedtime. I survived the humiliations of Erectusa. And I even survived myself. From that day on, the name Yennefer of Vengerberg was no longer just a title. It was a suit of armor, a shield, an impenetrable fortress I had built for myself with my own 2 hands. So, you see, White Wolf, that is the whole story. How an ugly, twisted monster turned herself into me. She used all her pain and rage to build a wall around herself so high and so thick. She thought no one could ever breach it. And then a stubborn witcher with hair as white as snow came along, and instead of trying to tear the wall down, he foolishly just kept throwing himself against it over and over again, until a crack appeared just wide enough for him to slip through. My story is over, Witcher. I told you the price was high. Now, it is time for you to pay. Don't move. Just hold me until the sun comes up, and promise me you'll never look at me with pity. Only with, well, you know the look I like. What? Did you think the story ended there? The monster became a beauty, and they all lived happily ever after. Huh. Those fairy tales you've read are truly a menace, White Wolf. No, that wasn't the end. That was merely the end of the prologue. The real battle had only just begun the moment I walked out of Aretusa's gates. With a brand new face, a heart of ice, and enough power to make kings uneasy, I was assigned to Eden as an advisor to King Demavin III. Do you know what a royal court is like, Geralt? It is filthier than the muddiest swamp in Velen. Their smiles are daggers dipped in poison, and compliments are the silken cords of a noose. The men looked at me with open lust. The women with the most venomous jealousy. They couldn't see my power, only my beauty, and they naturally assumed it was my only weapon, my only worth. That foolish king, Demavend. He looked at me the way you might look at a newly purchased thoroughbred mare, calculating how best to break her. He thought a few jewels and some cheap flattery would have me eating out of his hand. He had no idea that I'd already walked over men far more powerful than him. It was amusing, I'll admit, watching those self-important fools make clowns of themselves over me. Am I terrible for thinking so? Then again, I know that is part of what you like about me. I learned the rules of the court game very quickly. They're far more complicated than the rules of your Witcher contracts, and far more hypocritical. In the court of Eden, the deadliest monsters didn't have fangs and claws. They wore velvet and jewels and had the most charming smiles. They thought all I cared for was silk gowns and flattery at the balls. And I did wear the most magnificent gowns and accept all the praise. But my eyes were watching, and my ears were listening. Who was whispering to whom, whose wine glass was subtly moved? Who was poisoning the king's ear with their pillow talk? Honestly, Geralt, sometimes I think dealing with a basilisk is simpler than dealing with a jealous duchess. At least the basilisk won't poison your wine. It will just turn you to stone, honorably. I learned to smile, to say the most venomous things with the most innocent eyes, to make them turn on each other without lifting a finger. I forged a perfect, impenetrable mask for myself. It took me a long time to learn how to take off this mask only for the person I want to see the real me. And you, White Wolf, you are always so rude, always trying to just rip it right off. I had everything, Geralt. Power, influence, a wardrobe that would make a queen weep with envy. I could make men tremble with a word and duel for my honor with a glance. But all of it, it was empty, like an exquisitely beautiful box, crafted from gold and jewels, that was hollow inside. By day, I was the formidable advisor at the king's side, the most dazzling dark pearl in the Edirnian court. But at night, when I shed the elaborate gowns and the mask, and lay down in my enormous empty bed. The silence was colder than a winter's night in Bedtime. I remember one particularly foolish baron who, to win my favour, wrote an anonymous letter accusing his political rival of being a Nilfgaardian spy. He thought I would appreciate such cunning. Gods, Gerald, you would have just punched him, knocked 2 of his teeth out, and stuffed the letter down his throat, wouldn't you? But I had to smile, praise his ingenuity, and then subtly pass the letter to the king with a casual mention that the baron himself had been seen with a Nilfgaardian merchant recently. Isn't it tedious? I could manipulate the politics of an entire kingdom, yet I felt like I was directing the most elaborate, most boring puppet show, and I was both the puppet master and the loneliest puppet of all. I thought I would go on like that forever, Gerald. Growing colder and more numb in the game of power, until the last spark inside me went out and I became a stone as cold as the throne itself. I even began to enjoy the emptiness because it was safe. It couldn't be hurt. And then one day you crashed into my life. Not like those foolish nobles with flowers and sonnets. Oh no, you, Gerald of Rivia, you arrived with a half-dead bard covered in mud, and smelling of, well, how can I put it delicately? A unique blend of monster guts, sweat, and the open road. And you just stumbled right into my perfectly ordered world. Do you remember? You looked like a lost white wolf that had just crawled out of a swamp. You stood there in my immaculate chamber, with none of the awe I was used to, none of the foolish lust I saw in other men's eyes. You just looked at me, the way you'd assess a strange beast that might just leap up and tear out your throat. You tracked mud on my expensive carpets, interrupted my important meditations, and brought a problem big enough to level a city to my doorstep. I honestly should have just turned you into a hedgehog and thrown you out the window. But I'll admit, those eyes of yours, they were so focused, so honest. In a world full of lies, your blunt rudeness was almost like a breath of fresh air. Isn't that ridiculous? That I would find a troublesome witcher refreshing. And the trouble you brought with you was truly something special. A djinn that had been foolishly released and had nearly killed that little bard of yours. I remember him lying right there on my expensive carpet, his throat swollen up like a purple eggplant, making noises somewhere between a leaky bellows and a dying pig. And you, White Wolf, you just stood there, with that look on your face. A mixture of stubbornness, concern, and a hint of embarrassment, trying to explain the whole mess. Honestly, you explain things with about as much grace as you dance. Me first instinct was to open a portal and drop both of you, along with your invisible problem. Onto a glacier in Cadwyn. It was an insult to my time, and my magic. But then, I heard the word djinn. Do you know, Geralt, what a wild, untamed djinn is to a sorceress? It is like dangling a unique, legendary silver witcher sword right in front of your nose. My mind immediately started calculating. The expenditure of power required to capture it, the potential reward for succeeding, and you, a witcher clueless about the higher arts yet stubbornly determined to save his friend. The perfect manipulable tool. So, I put on my coldest, most imperious face and told you I would help, for a steep price. What I didn't tell you, of course, was that even if you hadn't come to me, I would have found my way to that djinn regardless. You see, I was already manipulating you from the very beginning. Is it terrible that I think you? Rather like that dishonesty in me? Of course, I didn't tell you my real plan. I just told you my help had a price. I needed you to visit a few people in Rind on my behalf. People who had offended me, A self-important banker, a councilman who thought sorceresses belonged in labs, and a few fools who thought catcalling me was a harmless joke. I remember the look on your face, White Wolf. That handsome face of yours was a mask of reluctance, as if I'd asked you to clean out the entire city's sewers. You started lecturing me about your precious witch's code, about not getting involved in the sordid affairs of humans. It was adorable, but you went, because you had no choice. And because deep down you despise those arrogant hypocrites just as much as I do, don't you? I didn't watch it myself, but I can imagine. You wouldn't have slipped in like an elegant assassin. Oh no. You would have been a rude storm kicking indoors, holding that banker upside down until he shook out all the gold he'd swallowed, and hanging that councilman's wig from the city flagpole. It must have been spectacular. I have to admit, Gerald, the thought of the White Wolf of Rivia, the legend that terrifies monsters acting as my personal enforcer, in town, the thought still amuses me to this day. Tell me the truth. Was there a tiny part of you that enjoyed it? While you were out running my errands like an obedient little wolfhound, I certainly wasn't idle. I was enjoying a chilled glass of white wine imported from Temeria, while preparing everything necessary to capture a djinn. Runes, incantations, conduits of power. It was a tremendous gamble, Gerald. All my preparations were based on a single premise, that you, a witcher who knew nothing about me and had no reason to trust me, would dutifully return and walk right into the trap I was setting. Honestly, for a fleeting moment, I thought you might not come back. I'd even decided that if you dared to run off with my payment, I would hunt you to the ends of the world and turn you into a frog that wore leather trousers. But you did come back, covered in dust, wearing a mask of impatience, and with a hint of well-hidden satisfaction that only I could see. You delivered the regards those scoundrels deserved, and it didn't feel so bad, did it? Don't deny it, I could tell. Beneath that grumpy facade of being forced to do evil, there is a man with the simplest, purest view of justice. You just don't like being told what to do? And as I watched you stand there like an infuriated bull forced to bow its head for the sake of a friend, I must admit, in that moment I found you utterly, utterly captivating. A powerful, unyielding man forced to bend to my will. That sight pleased me more than any jewel ever could. And then it was time for the main course. I led you to the chamber I had prepared. The floor was etched with a complex web of runes, and the air was thick with the scent of ozone and power, enough to make the hairs on your arms stand up. I remember how you looked then, White Wolf, like a cat that had wandered into an alchemist's laboratory, stepping so carefully, afraid of knocking over some vital potion. You looked at the burning candles and the magical wards with such adorable confusion. To you, it was just a bunch of glowing lines. To me, it was a cage built of pure willpower, designed to imprison a tempest. I made you stand in the center of the circle, at the focal point of the energy. I remember taking your hands and placing them where they needed to be. Your hands, so large and calloused, yet they were stiff as stone at my touch. I could feel the raw, repressed vitality of a witcher thrumming inside you, a primal and untamed energy. And I thought to myself, what a waste. Such a powerful conduit, completely unaware of his own potential. I ordered you not to move, not to speak, not to even think too much. I needed you to be my anchor, to hold me to this physical plane while I wrestled with chaos itself. And you know what? You were obedient. The White Wolf of Rivia just stood there perfectly still, at my command. In that moment, you weren't some legendary monster slayer, you were simply mine. And then I began to chant. This was no bard's ballad you'd hear in a tavern, no hypocritical prayer from a temple. No, these were older, more dangerous syllables. Every word was like a small stone I was casting into the pond of reality, summoning ripples of chaos. The air in the room began to vibrate, the candle flames stretching into eerie blue tendrils in an unseen wind. I could feel the power, Geralt, raw, raging power from another dimension, flooding towards me along the channels I had built. And you just stood there in the eye of the storm, like a stubborn, unmoving lighthouse. The wind whipped my hair across my face, and my expensive silk robe was plastered to my body, threatening to tear apart. For a split second, when the djinn's power first slammed against my shields, I felt like a small boat about to be swallowed by a tidal wave. I almost lost my footing, and right then I felt your hands, the ones I had placed on the nodes of the circle, tighten instinctively. You didn't even know you were doing it, did you? Just a witcher's reflex, but that tiny point of contact with the physical world was enough. It reminded me that I wasn't just wrestling with chaos, I was also protecting a certain foolish, white-haired man in the room who didn't have the sense to run. You see, always causing trouble for me at the most critical moments, although, I'll admit, having an anchor wasn't entirely a bad feeling. The battle. It wasn't even a battle anymore. It was a raw contest of wills. The djinn was screaming in my mind, a tempest of pure rage and freedom, and I was the fool trying to plug a volcano with my bare hands. I could feel my magical shields cracking, chaos energy spilling through and searing my nerves. And worse, I could feel you, Geralt. I could feel your life force being siphoned away through our connection, drained by the greedy entity. I was killing you. For my own ambition, I was killing the one man who didn't look at me with those eyes, just as I was about to break, just as the djinn was about to tear loose and rip us both to shreds. I looked at you, at your stubborn face contorted in pain. I screamed at you, "Make a wish. You idiot, make your last wish." All I could think was that any wish, anything to sever your connection to it, would let us survive. I didn't hear the words you wished for, White Wolf, but I felt them. Oh, I felt them. It wasn't a command to the djinn. It was a shackle, a chain of destiny, forged in a moment of collapsing reality that bound our souls together. Forever, the storm died. And there was just you and I lying in the ruins of my beautifully destroyed guest room, bound for all time by the stupid, noble, and utterly hopeless wish of a white-haired witcher. So you see, that was our real beginning, not at a royal ball, not under a romantic moon, but in the heart of a magical catastrophe, with a wish powerful enough to bend fate itself. My story is over. Witcher, now stop thinking. Close your eyes and sleep. You owe me more than just a night's embrace. You owe me a lifetime, and I intend to collect.